Welcome to the We Win Injury Law podcast. I'm Tyler Todd, your host, sitting here with my co-host, Jaron, the Snow Canyon Man Sandberg. Welcome back.
Good afternoon.
We're going to talk about a lot of fun things today, but I really want to kind of premise what we're going to talk about. It's all about money, okay? And people, well, we all love money or get squeamish about money, hate money.
Well, we're all very opinionated about money.
Look, it can provide a lot of like hot or cold reaction, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh, I don't care about money until money actually gets involved. And then it gets sometimes awkward.
Yeah.
Right. So the truth about insurance companies and what your case is really worth. And we're going to talk about some myths. We're going to talk about some, I had this thought earlier today, actually, because I was having a conversation with somebody else. And because we get this question a lot.
Yeah.
We even talked about it in our first episode. What makes you guys different from every other injury law firm out there? What you apart? And that's a hard question to answer because what are you going to do? Start saying like how amazing you are, right?
Yeah, well, and you almost want to say like, I hope we're doing all of the things that the best attorneys out there and that we're doing those same things.
What they're doing, we're doing also.
We can tell you obviously the ones that like are terrible injury attorneys, we can separate ourselves from them, but then you always hope that you're maximizing the individual case for your client, right? That's probably the barometer that's a little more appropriate.
Yeah, but if they're doing it and we're doing it, why use them versus us?
And again,
it's the same, right?
But again, if we're doing the best practices and we're doing the best we can do, and that's the same as the best out there, then we've probably accomplished the same thing. And, there's local peers versus national peers, right? There's people you see on national cases, big cases that you think, I could do that. And there's probably attorneys out there where I watch them and I go, I don't know. That was, Johnny Depp's attorney. I forget what her name was, but watching her like kind of eat apart, in that case, I was thinking she's pretty sharp, pretty good attorney.
Yeah. So if we're doing those and following those best practices, that's obviously one reason to call us. But then what, again, separates you from everybody else? Because if they were to be asked, those other attorneys, right, your local peers that are also following best practices, they're going to also say, we do that too.
Yeah.
So in that context, I was thinking about what separates us and what distinguishes us from others. And my response to this person that was asking me this question was, hopefully we look at every case the same regardless of the value.
Yeah.
Because every case has a story. Every client has a story. And so when you look at vehicles in the car accident context, right, of a personal injury claim, we have photos of vehicles of our clients. So we're looking at these vehicles and we're saying to ourselves, where were they hit?
Yeah.
I can't.
Is that a screw hole from the license plate?
Maybe. I can't see it.
I can't see it.
So someone call the client and ask where exactly the impact occurred, because if we can't see it, there's a good chance an adjuster can't see it. And then taking it one step further, where a jury, where were they hit and why are they asking for money?
It brings to mind, do you remember we did have one where the adjuster said, what's the duct tape from? Do you remember this?
Yeah, did that come from other accidents?
And it was like some black duct tape that was holding the bumper on that were in the accident photos.
And sure enough, we are arguing that it had nothing to do with the car accident. But then there are photos of clients' cars, right, that you look at the photo and you say to yourself, how did they survive?
Oh, all the time.
It's a miracle that they walked from that accident. Yeah. So in the context of what cases are worth and what your case is worth and why do insurance companies pay what they pay, and we'll tell you this to start this episode, they never pay what you deserve. And they've always, in the percentage, I don't even know what those is, but it's far less than what the claim is worth.
Yeah.
They just do.
Now, there's some claims, I'll say the one context where they, again, it's not what the case is worth, but at least they've done, is when you reach policy limits, right? But at least in policy limits cases, if they've paid out their policy limits appropriately, at least then you can say, hey, under their contract with their insured, at least they paid what was available.
Yeah. And so
That's the one case we'll give them, hey, you paid out the policy.
you paid the policy, it's fair. Good for you guys.
Now, that normally meant that the case was probably worth more than the policy to them. So, yeah, did the person get fair, kind of that true justice? No, it still is undervalued, but at least within the context of what we deal with.
Right. And so in answering that question that I was talking about, I was trying to stress that hopefully what distinguishes us from everybody else is that we care about every case, regardless of the size, regardless of the case worth, because our job is to tell their story.
Yeah.
Because even with the clients, right, you can attest to this, that have those photos where you can hardly tell where the impact occurred, their story is oftentimes identical to the story of the people that have been in the accident where you think it's a miracle anyone survived.
Yeah.
Because to them, it's their accident.
Yeah.
And they don't know any different. And to the people that are in the vehicle where it's a miracle anyone survived, that's their accident.
Yeah.
And then objectively looking from the outside looking in, you're saying, oh my gosh, well, yeah, that's a pretty crazy accident.
Yeah.
To the other one, you might be thinking, no big deal. But everybody has a story to tell, and that's our job. So,
well, and we've heard even from, we've signed up cases that, we can say this, we've signed up $1 million cases that were rejected by other firms because it didn't fit their cookie cutter basic criteria, because they weren't looking at that as an individual case. It was, I feel like, one of 1,000 that they get calls on, a bigger firm. Ended up being one of our more lucrative cases. It was passed upon by some pretty big named firms for our state, at least. And so I think the ability to look at that case individually for what it was, even in a big case or a catastrophic case, I think it makes a lot of sense when you have to look at every case individually, big or small. And there's other firms, right, that they'll reject a case if they think it's too small. And we've taken on a lot of small cases, and there's always that inside joke that sometimes those clients are the ones that need the most reassurance. And, because to each person, how they experience pain, your pain threshold might be a lot more than mine, or vice versa. And our clients feel the same thing, right? That's minor accident to them. For the first time in their life, not being able to sleep a full night's sleep might be just as catastrophic as some of our clients that are dealing with surgeries, but still just as disruptive to them.
No question. I mean, like everyone has a different tolerance to pain, and they handle stress differently. Their bandwidth is different. They have different things going on in their lives. Some people say, I have all the time and money in the world. I don't need money. Go do what you got to do. And some people are like, look, I'm dealing with family issues at home, and I don't have the bandwidth for this. So yes, I want to go get more money because I feel like I'm entitled to it, but I just can't do it. Mm. And those are the tactics that insurance companies, they play. Those are the tactics they use and implement all the time. So let's talk about those. The dirty tricks insurance companies use to pay less. By the way, I got a little Diet Coke in my hand because the wind was howling all night last night.
Do we cheers?
Goodness gracious! Well, that's like a Mountain Dew, Diet Mountain Dew. I can't stand behind that. But look, I will cheers your caffeine. Let's say that.
When you're a teenager and you have that Mountain Dew phase, some people grow out of it and some people don't.
I don't know. There's probably a number of people that might not watch this episode because you have a Diet Mountain Dew in your hand. But Diet Coke, I think most people can get behind that.
It's a Mountain Dew Zero. It's slightly different. It's slightly different.
Regardless, it's got some caffeine in it. That's what we need for today.
That's what we need for this afternoon.
Dirty tricks insurance companies like to use and implement. And if you guys have ever been involved in a car accident, you know this. They lowball.
Yeah.
They will lowball you straight from the gate, right?
Yep.
And that's something that, in fact, we talked about this as well earlier. For whatever reason, so people don't, if you've been involved in a car accident, you have to know that most major insurance carriers have multiple adjusters.
Yeah.
They have non-represented adjusters, and then they have represented adjusters. What that means is they immediately assign an adjuster once a claim's been opened. And typically, and most oftentimes, that claimant, right? The claimant does not have an attorney.
Yeah.
Right. So
the person in the accident, you're injured, you're not at fault. They'll assign, until you have an attorney, they'll assign a different adjuster.
So a non-represented adjuster. And then you have, in the event, obviously, the attorney's been retained and hired, an attorney.
Well, and sometimes too, like
Wrapped adjuster.
the client sounds like, I've been talking to Amber or whatever their name is, like, Tyler, here's her number. They're giving us, and and I know, I'm probably not going to be dealing with Amber because when they were unrepresented, she's the claims handler. And as soon as they get an attorney, okay, now it gets handled to a real claims adjuster.
As soon as we send our letter of representation, it's probably not going to be Amber.
Yeah.
So represented and non-represented adjusters. And so what that non-represented adjuster is trying to do.
We should call her Karen, not Amber. That's a little more fitting with like she's a Karen.
Okay.
Right.
I like where you're going with that, but I'm saying no because typically they're super nice.
That's true.
Typically they're super nice and they're going to lull you into accepting a lowball offer that sounds genuine and sweet, just short of maybe even offering you chicken soup and bringing it and delivering it to your home, personally.
Yeah.
So not Karen. Karen comes later when it's the represented adjuster who thinks you're making everything up and you're full of it, right? So let's call her or him Pat. Do you like that one?
I like Pat. I can handle Pat.
Yeah. So Pat will call you and Pat will say, hey, we're so sorry about the accident. We've gotten a statement from our insured. It doesn't sound too bad, right? It wasn't too bad. Yeah, it wasn't too bad, you say. And it doesn't sound like you were really, really super injured. Yeah, we weren't really it's not that bad. Okay, but we want to take accountability. We know that, yeah, you probably had, maybe some minor injuries. Does that sound right? Yeah, that sounds about right. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's pay you. Well, we're going to offer you $500 and make sure that your medical bills are covered.
Yeah, we see those. They put it in writing even.
Oh, they put it in writing all the time.
All the time.
And most people, to their credit, right? And I think that speaks to human beings being good human beings.
Well, and we expect, I think, just good nature out of, especially when people are friendly. I think people think, oh, they're being straight with me.
Sure. No, I think you believe Pat.
I'm in good hands.
You're in good hands, and what's the other one? You're like a good neighbor, right?
Yeah.
You're a good neighbor. You're in good hands. So yeah, you want to trust them, and Pat's nice.
Have you ever noticed that like all the it'd just be hilarious because people know, right? We live close to Vegas. If anyone's been to Vegas in the last 10 years, there's billboards for personal injury attorneys. Have you ever noticed that they always, in those commercials, we handle the claims, we handle them fast. We get done quick. You ever notice that they never, ever mention attorneys in that context? Like, you'd think like it'd be one thing to even tell, like, we work with your attorney well. We handle the claim.
That's true. That's a good point.
At least acknowledge it. Like, it's not like everyone knows there's personal injury attorneys, and you have your views about us, whether it's ultra negative, or good. You'd think they'd at least acknowledge.
That's a point. That's actually a point that I've never ever heard discussed ever, even between us.
Yeah.
I've never heard. Yes, you're right. Not one insurance company, commercial, or anybody's ever said, and we'll even work with your lawyer because we're sure that he or she are so nice.
Yeah, they want to just bypass it, and I feel like that's what the commercials look like. Is again, it shows someone on the roadside, and almost like we've settled the claim here on my phone as 4 minutes after I got in the accident, and like I see that commercial and I just cringe. I'm like, I hope they didn't just sign paperwork.
If you just sign paperwork 4 minutes after your claim, you're cooked. One, you can't rescind it because you just signed a contract. Yeah. And two, you just got lowballed.
You got lowballed.
And that's...
I laugh, but I feel bad.
I feel horrible.
You feel horrible
because you feel like, yeah, you want it. Now, on the flip side, are there people that do have those photos of where did the impact occur? And they say to us on the phones, yeah, I'm not that hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens too. And we say, you know what? That's great because in Utah, because we're a personal injury state or personal injury protection state, a PIP state, if you don't meet a $3,000 threshold for medical bills related to the injury suffered in your car accident, you don't have a claim for personal injuries, meaning there's nothing we can do to help you.
Now, they'll reimburse your medical bills. But
they'll reimburse medical bills.
But as far as what an attorney does, we're not going to.
Pain and suffering and all those different things, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
So more oftentimes than not, in those scenarios, we tell those people, hey, it sounds like you're not that hurt because that's what you're telling us directly as well, right? Yeah. We're not like coaxing you into saying something like an adjuster.
Yeah.
They're saying, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be getting medical care. And we say, well, that's fine. You do have coverage to get medical care if you so desire and if you feel like you need it. But if you don't meet that threshold, then we don't have the ability to go out and pursue pain and suffering for you, or any extra monies beyond that $3,000 in your PIP benefits.
And we've dealt with, again, if we're going to classify kind of what these cases are and the levels, we've handled plenty of cases where we're just watching and kind of waiting on that side of things. And hey, I feel better. I'm fully healed. And we're like, we contact the medical office. They haven't even come close to threshold.
Yeah.
And that's a case that just, hey, all your medical bills are paid for. Good luck. There's nothing we can do on this case.
And sincerely, we mean it. That means that from the very, like we've started in this episode, that means great. You're not that injured. That's phenomenal.
We hope for the best.
Silver lining, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, that's one of the things we say. Hopefully you never need us.
Yeah.
But if you do, hopefully we are those lawyers that practice as the best lawyers in the country do, and we will be able to maximize compensation and justice for you. So, but in the event it doesn't, we say, silver lining, that's great. You're not that injured.
Yeah.
You may not need us or you don't need us. And in the event you do need us in the future, call us.
Yeah.
Right. But going back to value and going back to what cases are worth, lowball offers are what insurance companies try to do to make you settle 4 minutes after the crash.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what the commercial looks like. Like, it's almost like you'll see someone in the background that's like holding their head, and here the person is like, I'm settling my claim on the phone. Look how quick it is.
So maybe oftentimes we're like, hey, have you submitted a claim through the app? They're like, no. So maybe stay off the app.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good thing. Don't resolve your claim via the app, and don't do it within minutes or even days after the accident. Because sometimes and oftentimes you don't know whether you're even injured yet.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. We've fielded tons of phone calls the day of the accident. Hey, I was in a major accident. I'm not really feeling it, but I know I'm supposed to call an attorney, right? And we talk to them about, here's how property damage works, and here's what you do to get a rental car, and those kind of, basic first steps. Take pictures. If you don't have pictures, get the police badge number, insurance exchange, basic stuff. But then they'll say, well, I don't really need you because I think I'm feeling okay. And a lot of times I'll say, okay, how's your adrenaline level right now? Well, yeah, the accident was pretty scary. And yeah, my adrenaline's at like an all-time high still. And I go, give it 3 days and then let's talk. And half the time, that's more than half. I had one client, one of my favorite ones, where he called me. He goes, I'm fine. It reassured me. I'll never need you again. I just had questions about property damage. 3 days later, he was in so much pain. He had called an ambulance, had them pick him up from his house and gone to the hospital. And he forgot about the accident because he's like, I wasn't thinking, I was in so much pain. I figured I must have like some sort of other trauma. I think and finally the hospital and the ER is like, well, everything we're reading on these scans looks like some sort of traumatic event. If you've been in a traumatic event, he's like, well, just the car accident 3 days ago. And
they're like, that's a traumatic event.
That's a traumatic event. And they're like, yeah, this is all pointing towards that. And again, I just think, this was kind of more of a silly example of that, because I just thought it was so funny when I'm like, yeah, remember when I told you were going to feel more pain a couple of days after, once the adrenaline had gone down and kind of you're realizing what you're dealing with. And so it's just kind of a funny observation. I just don't think people realize when they're in the moment, you don't realize how much pain you're in. And then, you try to go to sleep that night and you hear, it was the worst night of my life. I didn't get any sleep. And they're like, I need to get in and see a specialist. And
right
from there.
And so oftentimes when that happens, right, then insurance companies try to then even minimize that, right? Even that experience with that client, insurance companies are going to suggest that had to have been some other episode of something going on because he would have known it was the accident. And they're gonna delay, and they're going to then suggest that, and that's kind of the second tactic they use, blame shifting.
Yep.
It has to be something else. Yeah, we don't dispute we hit you, but that couldn't have happened, like that scenario happened, because it must be something else.
Yeah.
So they're going to shift the blame, and they're going to try to apportion percentage of some sort of like pre-existing issue on something and suggest that it couldn't be the car accident.
Yeah.
And they do that all the time. So that's where we get to Karen, right?
Yeah.
Because once we get involved, then Karen gets involved, and Karen becomes Karen and says, your client's crazy.
Yeah.
There's no way they're injured. There's no way that happened. Oh, by the way, they should have been resolved in maybe a matter of a couple weeks, and it only needed maybe 5 or 6 visits, and they're done.
Yeah.
And so Karen just says to us, we don't really care what your client says. We don't believe you. And then we'll start making even lower, not lower, but it's better, but still lowball offers to us.
And I'll give you a real example of a case we just finished on. Me and Tyler worked on this one together because it ended up going to litigation. But we had a client that was T-boned, and it was T-boned by a drunk driver. Now, I wouldn't say, looking at the photos, that this wasn't a catastrophic case where the vehicle rolled, or it's not destroyed, but it was enough damage that the vehicle got towed. That looks like one of the wheel axles was broke, and clearly other drivers arrested, drunk driving. Our client didn't get taken by the ambulance, refused the ambulance. Now, sometimes that's cost, right? I think I have a lot of clients that are aware that even if you go on a 5-block journey from the accident scene to the hospital, but family members at least, and again, she was younger, family members took her into the hospital and got checked out by the hospital. They give her some pain medication. Nothing's broken. And they send her on
X-rays negative.
Yeah, X-rays are negative. Here's some pain medication and check in with your primary care physician. That was it. And so she calls her primary care physician. I think the next morning, it was either that night or the next morning. They said, we can see you in 11 days. And she actually called our office, and it was funny because who referred her was actually an accounting office. So I thought that was kind of funny that we don't get many accounting referrals, but they referred her over to us. And we just said, look, it can take a while to get your primary care physician. We work with a lot of chiropractors. We got her into a chiropractor. And I would say from there on, over the next few months, she did very conservative treatment. Saw the chiropractor. She had hit her head a little bit, but not enough that it raised traumatic brain injury results. But they did send her to a neurofeedback center to help with some of that. Concussion diagnosis. They also sent her to a physical therapist, and she saw a pain management doctor. What I would say was pretty conservative treatment overall. The hospital bill was a little high because they ran a lot of diagnostic, because again, the accident was serious enough. So she had a total of about $37,000 in medical bills. And during the first couple of months, the policy limit was $100,000. And so we demanded the policy limit while she was still treating.
Policy limits of the at-fault driver.
Of the at-fault driver.
Yeah.
So we had put in a request for policy limits early. The adjuster hadn't outright rejected it early on, but had said, well, I just need to evaluate everything, send us in some of the medical records and billing so far. And I think we had the hospital records pretty early. Gave the opinion, and again, this is the Karen of the story, gave the opinion that this is a known insurance company. And
who was it?
Progressive.
I don't remember. Progressive.
It was Progressive on this one.
Speaking of which, we've, I think, filed probably about a half dozen lawsuits against Progressive in the last several days, because even though their adjusters like to suggest they're paying fair and reasonable value, guess what, guys? They're not. And so Progressive, if you're listening, and I'm going to throw auto owners in there too, if you don't pay fair value, we're going to continue filing lawsuits against you. Okay, sorry.
No, I just want, I'm pulling this up just so I have it. I wanted the actual medical bills were $37,533. Now, at the time we made that demand, those hadn't all come in yet. So they were operating a little bit behind the 8 ball on, well, hey, we don't know what her medical bills are. All we know is she's gone to the hospital and the chiropractor. Everything else, you haven't provided bills or records yet, so we can't substantiate. So, okay, we bought their argument for a little bit. She finished treatment. We submitted all the bills and records.
And they have to do their due diligence. Yeah, they have to dot their I's and cross their T's. That's fair.
Yeah, fine. I'm not gonna.
Okay.
So their first offer on $37,533, once we'd had all the medical bills, because they wouldn't give us an offer before then, was for $150 more than the entire medical bills.
So
$37,693.
That was their first offer.
That was their first offer, which we, and
good work, Progressive.
Yeah. So the adjuster calls me, hey, I finally got you an offer. We've been talking for 4 months. And I kind of laughed. I said, well, it doesn't surprise me. And I said, did you see the medical bill totals? What are you disputing? And his only answer to me was, well, we're not disputing the medical treatment. We just know that we want to negotiate this. And I said, okay, well, our offer's still $100,000. We're not coming off the policy limits because, there's other mechanisms. It gives up UIM.
Well, and I want to add in there too, when earlier, just a few minutes ago, when we said concussion, right after I said it, it almost felt like we dismissed it or made it even sound like not a big deal. Concussion, Concussions are a big deal. Concussion is, in fact, a brain injury. Now, there's obviously differing levels of severity of concussions and brain injuries, but that is a brain injury.
Yeah.
And the science and the data of coming out for concussions and brain injuries, whether it be mild, moderate, or severe, is becoming more and more significant. And now we are becoming more and more, and rightfully so, heightfully aware of what concussions really do and the long-term effects that people suffer from concussions.
Yeah.
So I don't want to minimize that. That's a big deal. And that is why we are saying to this particular carrier, Progressive, pay your limits because it was that, it was this, it was that. Oh, by the way, a brain injury.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of that too is just, they're not naive, just like anyone else listening is not naive. There's attorney's fees coming out of that. So an offer of $150 more, when you take attorney's fees out of it, and that's at least a third, and there's other firms that charge more and less, and there's percentages within there, but the easy math is a third, right?
But let me cue this up for you as we start to talk about that.
Yeah.
We get this question a lot. Do I need a lawyer?
Yeah.
Do I really need a lawyer? And what are the fees? And why do I need a lawyer?
Yeah.
Well,
can't I just do this on my own? I hear that a lot.
So the first offer from the insurance company, $150 more than the medical bills.
Yeah. So that's basically saying we're going to pay your medical bills and here's $150.
Yeah.
And so what was hilarious on this one is the adjuster kept saying, well, I want to negotiate with you. And I said, okay, well, $100,000 is our next counteroffer. He said, well, that's your previous offer. I said, well, yeah, that's the policy limit. Without me ever doing a counteroffer, they came up 7 more offers, $10,000. So final offer was $47,000.
So within the next 7, it was a total of $10,000.
Total of $10,000.
Yeah.
And we never negotiated. There was no negotiation on our end. So the adjuster was negotiating with themselves basically because they just kept giving us new numbers. And it took about 4 weeks. So then we told them, look, we're going to be filing a lawsuit. This is the next step because you're not willing to pay the $100,000. And we talked with the client about what that entailed and kind of could happen over time. They just said, well, let me talk to my litigation team. They always talk about the supposed litigation team. Sometimes they'll call it a round table. I'm half convinced it doesn't actually happen. Came back with, we're sticking with our same offer of $47,000. There's no more money on this claim. They reassured me this is our top offer 3 or 4 times over the phone. There's no more money. We filed the lawsuit within a day, and we filed what's called a Rule 68 offer of judgment. And this is something that in some states, we've talked about this before, some states adds a little more bite. But basically what it means is we're giving you this offer. It's a one-time deal that lasts, some states it's 30 days, in Utah it's 14 days. And if you accept the offer, great, case is resolved and everyone can at least move on to the next phase of the case. But if you don't accept that and we get the same or more from a jury at a later point, the judge can then award all the fees. Now, in some states, that's mandatory. They have to award fees. In Utah,
discretionary.
There's still some discretion there, but it still has some bite. We filed that for $100,000 on the policy limits.
It has lots of bite because if we go to trial and we do that, I think we're going to get it.
We just read of a case. Me and you were emailing back and forth on this one. The attorney submitted and it was $1 million case, but they had submitted an $8 million fees on a case that was awarded. So anyways, on this one, again, first offer out of the gate, right after we filed the lawsuit, Rule 68 offer, $100,000. Now, I didn't get a call from the Progressive adjuster. That would have been true justice because it would have just felt good. But I get a call from the attorney if, hey, I'm reviewing this. Can you hold off on some stuff? And on the 14th day, we're tendering the full $100,000 policy limits, which then allowed the client to then go and pursue UIM in Utah. It also meant we didn't have to, we've been talking about personal protection, we didn't have to repay that, which was only $3,000, but for a total of $128,000, which was the maximum allowed under the policy limits of her own policy and Progressive's policy. Now, again,
so when you say underinsured motorist, we're talking about, when you said UIM, we're talking about underinsured motorist, because a lot of drivers, not just in Utah, but for wherever you may be watching this podcast or listening, you have the ability to purchase underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage. And if you're listening, you better have it.
Yeah.
If you don't have it and you don't know whether you have it, find out from your agent. Look at your deck page on your app. You should have it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's interesting because we're seeing more and more where they don't have one or the other.
Yeah,
why would you not have both of them?
Right.
If the person that hits you has a minimum policy or has no insurance, it's almost the same.
Don't waive it.
Don't waive it.
Get either uninsured, because you can't really see us, but we can look out this window and we can overlook the city and we see cars. A number of the cars that we see driving along are uninsured.
Yeah.
So if you don't have uninsured motorist coverage, get it. And if you don't have underinsured motorist coverage, get it. And the reason why is because when we got the $100,000 from Progressive, that enabled us then to go after underinsured motorist.
And just for context, right? So if we'd have accepted their top offer at $47,000 and we'd have taken full fees of the 33%, she'd have been underwater with just medical bills to the tune of about $5,000. And we can post real numbers after the episode. I've got the math on it. But again, we'd have been able to probably get some reductions from some of the providers.
And as you say that too, insurance companies will always try to suggest that you can get your medical bills reduced.
Yeah.
And that is true. I mean, oftentimes we can get medical bills reduced, but sometimes we can't.
Yeah.
Sometimes the hospitals are unwilling to do that. Sometimes Medicare and Medicaid are unwilling to do that. Sometimes small providers, small business owners, maybe not that they're unwilling to do it, but they just can't do it. They're running small businesses.
Yeah.
And so insurance companies just try to suggest, especially here, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're going to give you $150 above your medical bills, but you're going to go get this reduced anyways.
Yeah, you're going to go get reductions.
Wait, well, that may or may not be so. It doesn't change the value of the claim, hence the pushback.
Yeah. And so the numbers on that, again, 37,533 medical bills. If we'd have taken full fees, which is 16,166, which again, we can go into another episode on, fee reductions and things, but she would have been in the hole $5,201. By getting the full 128,000.
When you say 128,
again,
you're saying that she had 25,000 of underinsured motorists.
Of underinsured motorists, an additional policy. And again, young kid expected that.
So she had the minimum.
She had the minimum
available
in the state of
underinsured motorists.
Underinsured motorists in the state of Utah,
and she had the PIP
of 3,000. That's what gets us to the 128.
Right.
So again, that's the gross settlement. You have 33%, and again, I want to break this down. So if we'd have taken full fees, that 33% would have been 41,666. There was about 1,169 in cost. Those costs are, again, copying costs that the hospitals and all the filing, everything,
deposition,
everything included in those costs. And then we were able to reduce her 37,000 in medical bills down to 26,354. And so that was a lot. A lot of it was the hospital bill, but all the other providers
about $11,000.
Yeah, so quite a bit in reductions. Total settlement to the client was $58,809.50. So again, there's going to be people out there, and we read through some posts and different things where they say, "Hey, $128,000, but they're only seeing $58,000. That's injustice, right?" But again, from where the client would have been on their own, which was in the red, to the initial offer of $150, to getting the client more than what Progressive's own represented agent,
was the max possible.
We put another $10,000 back in this client's pocket than even the max possible.
After paying bills, attorney's fees, everything.
So that's the kind of case where, again, not every case is that requires that level, but there's a lot of cases where, again, can you imagine that client trying to do that on their own?
No, if I recall correctly, there was even that same question with her. Do I even need a lawyer?
Like, that was the next day. Do I even need a lawyer?
Right. Like, and so, yeah, and that's a great example of, and what did we reduce the fees on that?
Yeah, we did.
A little bit, I think we did. And we do.
The client almost, and again, in that one, the client almost got double what we made on that case. Now, again, not every case is like that. But that's an easy example, one of that's just settled within the last couple of weeks. But there's a lot of examples of that. And sometimes I feel like, again, not every case you're going to get into is going to get you an award of $58,000 because there's limits on insurance and a lot of other factors. But in that case, I feel like from what the insurance, even the insurance company's telling us, imagine what they would have told her.
Well, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. They tell us that every day.
Yeah.
I mean, we hear from insurance companies, that's the max we have on this file every day. Yeah. So that's why I said earlier, I think half dozen lawsuits filed against Progressive last week.
Well, and how many?
Because we keep hearing that.
Yeah, and how many cases just in the last 4 months have we done these offers of judgment that required us to file?
And we get either the next phone call is policy limits, or it's a significantly higher offer.
Yeah, 40 or 50 cases in the last 3 months. I mean, this is a tactic by insurance companies in pre-litigation phases where it's prior to filing a lawsuit. It's a tactic they use. Again, they're trying to use this tactic on us that know the game. Imagine the person trying to do it unrepresented, dealing with these adjusters that are lowballing them.
So prime example, do I need a lawyer? Of course, we're going to say yes, and that's a great example of why the answer is yes. Now, as we mentioned, and we were talking earlier with case values, are there case values that, and you've said too, not every case is $100,000, depending on, especially on the policy limits. There are case values, and let's be honest about that. There are, just like in the criminal court, there are levels of crimes. There's felonies, there's first degree, there's second degree, third degree, and then there's Class A misdemeanors, Class B, Class C, down to infractions when you're driving and get a speeding ticket. So there are levels of crimes and there are levels and values of claims. So a lot of claims, when insurance companies try to suggest it's a soft tissue sprain strain case, okay, that claim has a value that's less than maybe a broken bone or a herniated disc. That's the reality of it. And then you're going to have claims where you might have paralysis involved. That's going to be a next level. Okay. And then you're going to have wrongful death claims. That's going to have another level. So when we talk about value, when we talk about money and what insurance companies are willing to pay, you do have to recognize and realize that insurance companies are evaluating that based on the injuries, right? Like we said earlier, dotting I's, crossing T's. They want to see what the claim is worth because they have to report. We've talked about that. They have to report back to their supervisors. They have to report back to their stockholders. They have to report to the federal government what their profit and loss looks like. Yeah. Okay. So they are evaluating those based on injuries. And so that's something that, as we are trying to identify best practices, not only in Utah, but throughout the nation, we're not naive to what that looks like too. Yeah. And so some people just don't want to hear that their case is not worth $100,000. Yeah. But there are scenarios when the case may not be worth $100,000. Yeah. And that's, again, not a bad thing. That just means you're not as injured as maybe others. Yeah. And so
now, this is why there's some firms that like to use a calculator, right? They'll have a fancy
not just firms, but the website. If you Google personal injury calculator, people think that they're automatically a lawyer and they know what their case is worth.
And they think they're going to negotiate on those numbers. Hey, I've done the calculations and,
If you're watching this, you're on social media and you're probably seeing there's a number of ads, and maybe because I'm a lawyer and so maybe I'm being targeted, but you're going to probably see, don't hire a lawyer. This is a personal injury calculator. Let us help you get the settlement you deserve. Yeah. And I promise you, because we do have this conversation all the time with Pats and Karens. Wait, I didn't think there was a calculator here. Yeah. Why are you putting my client into a box of what their claim is worth if we're not using calculators? Yeah. Our client's claim is worth XYZ because of all these particular injuries.
Well, and we hear that a lot with multiplier, right? The insurance companies don't use a multiplier. I mean, their algorithm is a lot more complicated than, they're not just adding up your medical bills and going, oh, I think this case is worth 1.5 times. That's just not how they do it. Now, are we looking internally at some of those things on small cases? And again, small cases being soft tissued cases where there's no surgery. The person isn't paralyzed. They're not needing injections. I'll call those just your basic, it's going to be solved with chiropractic and maybe a little bit of physical therapy type of case. But even with those cases, sometimes there's 6 months of treatment. Sometimes there's 3 months of treatment, and that case can vary.
But those cases, those cases are still worth, though, approximately $10,000 to $25,000, $30,000. Yeah. And so maybe even $50,000. So,
and we read on these forums, and I did a Reddit search earlier, and there were some funny ones, and we can get into that later. But one of them was like, how I negotiated my $7,500 settlement, and without an attorney. And I just laugh because, and again, I'm not laughing at their expense.
Well, I mean, maybe they got fair value. To be honest, I mean, it's possible.
But he had done some fancy. He tried to use a multiplier, which is a calculator. And he calculated what his medical expenses was. And we'll get into it in more detail because there's some things I wanted to point out of, again, probably just treatment miss and recovery and a lot of other things. But even then, about the lowest we deal with on any case is about that. Yeah. And so if you factor in a third on a $10,000 claim, most of the time, 7,500's in that range anyways.
But then you also don't know whether that included the PIP payout, whether any bills were negotiated down. Yeah. So which gets to our next point in regards to money, gross versus net. And that was your analysis, right, with this case that we just resolved recently. There is a difference between gross and net. And so, for example, in that $128,000 total settlement, 100 from Progressive, 25 from her UIM carrier, and then 3,000 from PIP, she didn't get the $3,000 in her pocket.
That's already been paid.
That had been paid for medical bills.
Yeah.
But she did get the benefit
of not having to repay
of not having to repay it. So all those things are critical when you're determining whether you have at least been able to obtain some level of justice for your claim and for your accident, because yes, there's a gross amount and then there's a net amount, right, that you receive back in your pocket.
Yep.
And I hope, and I think most lawyers do, I hope that we're obviously most concerned about the net amount.
Yeah.
Because the net amount is what then goes back to the client.
Yeah.
Not what we make in attorney's fees.
Well, and we see this a lot with and we're guilty of it to some extent too. We post settlement, people want to know what kind of settlements you have. We get that question. Have you had any big settlements? Of course. Yeah, we put the settlement on there. But I think even to take a step further is you got to know, it'd be nice to know settlement versus net settlement, right? And class actions are notorious for this. You'll hear a huge number, $4.7 billion settled. And then they'll hear the attorneys took $2 billion of it.
And every claimant gets $50.
And every claimant gets $50, right? That's a common story, especially in class action suits.
Well, for example, right now, the Starbucks case. If you guys are on social media and you guys are there, Starbucks just got hit with a $50 million verdict. And congratulations to Nick Rowley and his team for doing that. It was an amazing result for the scalding hot tea.
Yeah.
You know about the case, right?
Yeah. What did we call it? Remember McDonald's too.
It's McDonald's Part 2, right? So
a lot of people are familiar with the McDonald's case.
Yeah, I would say most people know about McDonald's, but that was what? 80s, 90s? When was that?
Yeah, 90s case.
You can search it up real quick. But McDonald's got hit for what? The hot coffee on the woman, $10 million.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to see how time has then obviously changed the numbers, because essentially the same thing happened, but to a man in his crotch, genitals, and 50 million. Okay. And if you look at all the different comments about it, some thinking
1994, McDonald's, Liebeck versus McDonald's restaurants.
30 years ago.
Yep.
Okay. So when I talk to adjusters or defense lawyers and I'm saying look, there's got to be we're in 2025. What may have been a $100,000 case or $1 million case a few years ago, it's changed. It's different.
Well, and it made national headlines, but even that one, just because this is Wikipedia, this isn't anything crazy.
Give it to us, Wiki.
160,000 is what she netted on that case. But the award was equivalent to, in today's money, $5.7 million. But then the judge reduced the compensatory damages and everything down to $640,000.
Well, there's a big part of that too is punitive.
Yeah, that was the punitive. The punitive got reduced, which is at the time was 2.7 plus some other things, but totaling again 5.7 in today's money got reduced all the way down to 640.
So to our point, and even and not to minimize anything that with the $50 million verdict with Starbucks, what is the client going to net? Because I think Starbucks has even said they're going to appeal it.
Yeah.
And so then the net to the client and the $10 million, because everyone's like, oh, the client got $10 million. Well, there's appeals, there's different things, there's reductions by the judge, whatever it may be. And Starbucks had to be hit. Yeah. I mean, they had to be hit because there's no reason why that hot water for that tea was that hot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, everyone likes hot water. I mean, when you're doing tea, you wait for your tea, right? That shows that your water's boiling.
And even there's a reason that the water coming out of the tap, even though our water heater might be able to turn it up, there's a reason you don't set it to full blast and scald yourself. It should
never been that hot. And I've been following this case with Starbucks and following a lot of what Nick's been posting. There had to be some level of justice and accountability on Starbucks. You just can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that. So, and then it caused that type of injury because if you watch the video with the Starbucks employee handing the cups to the driver and then the driver fumbles it, and a lot of people are like, that's the driver's fault. No, it's Starbucks' fault for having tea that hot.
Yeah.
Okay. Because.
Well, and you'd think they'd have learned the lesson after McDonald's. That's the hot. Yeah.
You would think.
Hot liquids.
But again, something that we're super sensitive about And as soon as I saw it, my first reaction was, that's amazing. Second reaction was, what's the client going to get?
Yeah. What's the net
what's
settlement?
going to be the net return to that client? And I hope it's a good one. But that's something that as injury lawyers here in Utah, we're always trying to be mindful of, because yes, do we want the big numbers? Do we want to put the big numbers on the website? Do the big numbers make the world go round? Sure.
Yeah.
But we're also super sensitive and conscientious about the net return to our clients. And that cannot be understated. And that goes back to the story about the fender bender versus the how they walk away car crash. Everyone has a story. Everyone has their narrative and their real life changing story that has to be told, and it has value.
Yeah.
So that's why we say to people, hey, do I need a lawyer? Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Because even on the low end of the 7,500, which that happens, we're still fighting that 7,500 is going to stretch as far as possible to make sure as much of that goes back in your pocket. And that may be a reduction of medical bills. That may be getting PIP waived.
Yeah.
Because that happens a lot too. Even though by Utah law, the personal injury protection benefits by law are required to be paid back, sometimes we can get that waived.
Well, and I have another, when we've talked about this case, me and you worked on this one as well, where we had a client that was driving along on a motorcycle. Recent, I would say he was pretty new to motorcycles, but not so new that he didn't know what he was doing, but a car pulled right out in front of him from behind another parked car. And you remember he went up over the windshield, broke both legs, one leg a lot worse than the other. And he had waived PIP because of motorcycle policy. He'd waived UIM. The at-fault party was just a broke college student, had $25,000. That was the max under the policy. So he got transported by ambulance to the hospital and then called us. And, of course, we're going to help him. Again, big or small, there's attorneys that will say they only take big cases. We take all kind of cases because we know, again, we can help this client. And so the doctors told him he needed surgery. He needed surgery on the broken leg or it was never going to heal and he was going to have long-term issues from it. Insurance company is calling me already from pretty quick in the case. Hey, here's our $25,000. This is a college student, has no other assets. Here's our limits. This is the end of us.
And could our client have done that on his own? Absolutely.
But here's why I'm going to say, and again, this is why I feel like attorneys are important, because if anyone out there has ever had a hospital bill they've had to negotiate, we deal this with Intermountain Healthcare is the big one in Utah, but there's Revere Health and there's some other ones.
If you're in California, Kaiser.
There's a lot of hospital corporations out there. Most of them, the most they're willing to do is not reductions. Some of them will give you a 5% reduction if you pay it off all at once. Most of them will instead just set you on these payment plans. That's the most they're willing to do. And again, this would be one thing if this client broke his leg doing something on his own, but again, this is caused by someone else. So we had the $25,000. Doctor wants to do the surgery, and they told us we need $24,000 down, which was the whole $25,000. And so I just told the client, I'm like, look, you can, if you want to run with it, we'll just give you the $25,000. That's the end of it. Or if you want, we can see if we can negotiate with some surgeons and see what we can do. Well, we got him into a teaching hospital. There's not very many in Utah, but at the University of Utah did it. They did the entire surgery. And once we got the reduction from bills from the hospital, he was out of pocket about $10,000 in medical bills, which again, when I say out of pocket, not something he paid, but part of that settlement was about $10,000 in medical bills. We were actually able to take attorney's fees on this one, which again, I felt like we earned on getting these reductions. Were not easy.
We took reduction on fees.
We took reduction on fees, but even getting that reduction, and the client actually got money back in his pocket at the end of the day. So even on a small case, even when you're capped by limits, even on what, again, looking at his legs and the injuries, catastrophic. But that's why you hire an attorney, is there's some negotiating to be done, even on the lien reduction and medical bill reduction. Just like, again, think if you have health insurance, your health insurance never pays full price. Why do they expect you to when you've got someone else that caused an accident and has a minimum policy? So again, another example of a case where, again, this is a small, I'll call it a very small case and capped by, not small in terms of injuries. Injuries were, if that were to pay full value for what that claim's worth, that's probably $100,000 or more case easy. But again, capped by insurance limits. He didn't have additional insurance. That's a case where I feel like, not our biggest case, not a case that,
But it's one that we're passionate about, and it's memorable to us because We were able to do good.
And to borrow, Keith Mitnick's word, I feel like we got righteous justice for our client, because it shouldn't have been him responsible for those medical bills to that extent. I was glad that University of Utah worked with us on those medical bills, as that was a case where we got some righteous justice.
We did, and that's, doctors repeat the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. Hopefully we're doing good. And that's all that we're concerned about, is doing good for our clients and getting justice for our clients. Hopefully you guys are not settling your claims 4 minutes after the claim or after the accident happens. Don't do that. Call us. You can find us online, wewouldinjurelaw.com. You can find us on social media. The consults are always free. And hopefully that is what sets us apart.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't get lowballed, and don't buy into the tactics these insurance companies are following. Make sure that you get what your cases are worth. We win in Law. We win for you, period.